All right, now we're going to go to Washington, D.C., where President Obama hosted a job creation summit at the White House today. That gathering including economists, union heads, and business leaders, among them Eric Schmidt, the chairman of Google. He joins us now from the White House. Eric Schmidt, welcome to the program.
Well, good afternoon.
Eric, all right, so can you tell us, what specifically did you learn? We heard a lot of political statements, but are there any specifics in terms of policy changes to increase hiring in the United States?
Well, the government is looking for ideas, and there are lots of ideas. The most obvious one is to try to get small businesses money. They need loans. Basically, they can't get any loans. They can't hire any people. Because remember that jobs in the United States are primarily created by small businesses, especially small entrepreneurial businesses. There were some other interesting ideas about changing some regulations, trying to get our exports to go stronger, try to get more people to come in and use some of our educational systems and those kinds of things. And all of those, I think, will contribute to the jobs problem and help solve it.
Eric, how about the comparison between the recovery in the United States and any potential recovery in Europe and in Asia? I mean, you're the head of Google. You see a global world. Give us a comparison.
Well, we did not discuss the recovery in the other parts of the world. We were focused on America today here. From a Google perspective, I was surprised to see the European recovery occur as quickly as it did. Historically, Europe has lagged 6 to 9 months, both in terms of success and also failure, after the U.S. sort of starts whatever the good or bad news is. And my lesson there is that the markets are much more interlinked today than they were 10 years ago. As we know, Asia has been doing pretty well throughout the recession, even though they've had their share of issues. So I think overall the message is that the recovery is more synchronized and the countries are more together, up as well as down.
Talk a little bit, if you can, Eric Schmidt, about what is going on in China and Google. Many people say Google's never going to be #1 in China because of Baidu and the Chinese government. What's the strategy?
Well, China, of course, is difficult to operate in because they have some rather draconian laws that we are unfortunately forced to adhere to. And there are other reasons to think that there might be some favoritism. But overall, we think that operating in China is pretty important because the Chinese citizen benefits from more information. And although it's true that we're #2, there's evidence that we're gaining in market share, and we're optimistic for the long term. As our products get better, as our brand gets stronger, we should do pretty well there.
Talk a little bit about Android. I mean, it's had a breakout year. Are mobile ads going to be the highest value ad in the space?
Our evidence is that mobile ads are likely to be worth much more than traditional ads because they're more targeted. And everything says that a more targeted ad is more valuable because it's more specific, it's more personal, people are more likely to use it. So over time, we think mobile ads will be more revenue, if you will. At the moment, mobile searches are still significantly smaller than non-mobile, but mobile searches are growing much faster. So it's a race, and we'll see which one wins.
What about
long term? I think it'll be mobile.
All right. I beg your pardon. What about a Google-branded mobile phone? I mean, what does that do to any potential strategy for a multi-carrier Google platform?
Well, anything that we do will be multi-platform and with lots of partners. And so today, we're very, very happy with the partnership structure. And you look at the success of the Android platforms today, you can see the strategy is working.
What about the smartphone revolution? I mean, many are looking at that as a sort of a next-generation netbook. What is Google doing to capitalize on it?
Well, we have a product, in addition to the Android platform, we've also announced a product which is not yet shipping called Chrome OS, which is a completely new way of building operating system platforms that are very, very mobile. And of course, the jury's still out on what people will think about it, but we're pretty optimistic. The new model going forward is everything is mobile. It's a mobile phone, it's a mobile personal computer, and most people are on wireless networks. And those wireless networks are incredibly fast, and the applications are phenomenal. They know a lot about you, they know what you care about, they use the back end, the Google data, to do amazing things. Things like face recognition, complex analyses. They remember everything, things that you could never do yourself.
Do we get a Google-branded mobile phone in the next quarter?
Well, I'm not going to talk about future products. We are working very, very hard with the mobile platform products to get a new generation of platforms out. We're having great success with Android. Of course, it's the Christmas season. It's a great time to be buying a new mobile phone, and we think Android's a pretty good choice.
What about the display advertising market and brand advertising? What is keeping the brand advertising away from the display market?
It's coming. And what's happening is we have a set of new tools which came out of our DoubleClick acquisition, which over the next 6 months we think will revolutionize that market. We announced an exchange which allows you to sort of decide, let the computers decide where the best display ads come from. We have large now trials in display, and it's one of our largest and now fastest growing businesses. It's growing more than twice as fast as our core business, and that's very exciting.
Eric, talk a little bit, if you can, about trials in the world of paid-for information. Can you give us a perspective? If indeed you had to sit down with Rupert Murdoch of News Corp, what would you be advising Rupert Murdoch in terms of paying for news?
Well, we of course talk to News Corp all the time, so these are all friendly conversations. And the news industry has a hard problem because the model that they've depended on has fallen to some degree less favorable as these new online models are taking off. And we've been looking for ways of coming up with essentially monetization models where they get paid for it using powerful display ads, other ways that they can actually get compensated for it. The ultimate solution to the news industry is to develop new kinds of monetization, new kinds of commercial products, which when people are consuming news, reading newspapers and so forth, that essentially do the same thing that newspapers and magazines today do, but they do it on an online basis.
Well, can you give us any hint as to how that might actually take place? I mean, right now, for example, a lot of people seem to be using the free trial features of Google to actually access paid content through a back door. How do you actually stop that from happening?
Well, in fact, with the free trials earlier this week, we actually put a limit on the number of such things that you could do because we didn't want people to misuse it. It's very important to know that the publishers of information, it's very easy for them to actually delete the information from Google if they wish to. So it's a shared responsibility for us to distribute their copyrighted material and to respect their copyright. What we need to find out is when that person is going from a free trial to then reading the content, we have to come up with good mechanisms for them to pay. The most obvious one is the subscription mechanism, where they can either subscribe to the specific vendor or they can subscribe to a basket of vendors. And those are technologies that we're trying to develop right now.
All right, but Eric, I mean, haven't we found that, for example, in the music business, while you might pay a little bit, the margins, they never really go back to the way they used to be?
Well, I would argue, as a former member of the Apple board, that iTunes is a pretty successful model. iTunes took an industry that did not really understand how to come up with paying systems and built a good model that works pretty well. And on a revenue basis, it's not as high, but on a gross margin basis, it's quite good because the cost of distributions are lower. So it's perfectly possible that in the news and magazine industry, a similar transition will occur. Where remember that the information costs much less to distribute, so the total cost of the industry is lower, and so the profitability can be there against a lower revenue base.
Can it even be there against the fact that it costs more to actually sort of put the information together, to gather the information? Because while it may be less expensive to distribute, it's still expensive to gather.
It still costs the same to produce the information, of course, and that's where the real value is. But in the internet, distribution costs go to zero. And in a model where distribution costs are zero, you have to come up with another monetization model. Google, of course, has pioneered the advertising model, which has worked very well. But we think there are other ones, various forms of pay-per-view, pay-per-click, and other kinds of subscription models that will ultimately predominate. It'll be a combination of advertising and subscription revenue that I think will lift us out of this current crisis.
Eric, talk a little bit about video on the internet and the delivery of movies and television programs there. What do you see in terms of being able to monetize that?
We're actually seeing good success with YouTube. We're doing partnership with most of the major studios now to put content, both short and long-form content, on YouTube. And there are various forms of either rental, download, or download-to-own models that are being experimented with. The sum of all of those, I think, will solve the problem as well. Historically, you had free content and you had illegally copied content, which is no good. So now we've got a model where you can not only distribute legal content, but if somebody uploads illegally content, we can claim that and convert it to a monetized content, which I think is going to work pretty well.
Eric, as part of this monetizing content strategy, will you be building specific and local geographical portals, let's say, for the real estate business? Will you be building those yourself? We
have talked about that a lot, and I think it's unlikely. Typically, the more vertical, the more narrow, the more sort of portal, the less it's a good fit for Google, and it's better for other partners to do that. And we're happy to power their advertising and search as they need to.
Talk a little bit, if you can, about the search business right now. Google having the lion's share of that market. When you look at search in the future, when do you combine that with the GPS information?
Well, today you can with some devices, because they do in fact give what we call a geolocation as part of the information. There's some evidence that somewhere around 10% of the searches could have geolocation information in them. So it's not a majority of it, but we're beginning to do that now, and it's very, very exciting. When you say pizza, Washington, D.C., we actually know that you're in Washington. If you just say pizza, we can also know that you're in Washington and give you a better result.
What would you say, Eric, to the local newspapers that have been struggling to really figure out a new model for advertising? Do they partner with Google? What do they do to survive?
Well, first place, we want them to survive, and we're happy to partner with them. I think they have the hardest problem at all. The large national newspapers are very well run. They have a huge scale effects and so forth, and I think that they're going to get through this. The local newspaper, who provides tremendous value to the local community, covers the mayor, covers whatever, they're finding it very, very difficult to maintain their local audience. They have to specialize in order to do that. They have to become known for a specific area, and of course they also have to have a very strong online presence. And having said that, I still think it's extremely difficult for them.
Eric, you spoke a little bit about the world of video. Talk about television right now with the combination of Comcast and NBC Universal. What's Google's response to the outbreak of cable operators? They've got a pretty good subscription model there. How do you compete?
Well, we don't think we compete directly at all. We think that in most of those people, they are significant partners, because most of them provide broadband internet, Comcast being the most successful of the cable internet providers. So from our perspective, the fact that they're building out a wide internet is a huge win. Eventually, remember that all of these distinctions go away, that eventually in your home or business you'll have a 100 megabit or a gigabit connection that will be fiber-based, and all of that content will flow regardless of whether it's television or HD or DVD or what have you, and that those systems will become much more subscription-based rather than transport-based.
Eric, as a former board member of Apple, you use an iPhone?
I do.
And what's your favorite app?
Shazam.
Shazam. And what about the app? Go ahead. I beg your pardon. Go ahead. Tell me why you like Shazam.
Let me explain why. Because every time I use Shazam, I realize how magical computer science is. Shazam, within 10 seconds, can recognize any song that I have in my extensive iTunes library. And the fact that they can do that, to me, is still phenomenal.
Talk about this concept of genius in applications. Are we going to see bigger app stores, and will Google participate?
Well, I'm sure we will in general. I can't speak for Apple, of course, but I do know that Apple is delivering a genius approach to sorting out applications, and it strikes me as a very good way of getting crowd feedback to do that.
All right, I want to thank you very much, Eric Schmidt, coming to us from the Job Summit in Washington, D.C., the chairman of Google.